Hello and welcome to Undrafted, a Dynasty game theory podcast brought to you by the Undroppables. I am your host, Scott Belanger, aka Jax Falcone. You can find me on Twitter at Dino Game Theory. This is episode number 230. Let's roll. And we're a little late in the week, but better late than never. We are actually recording this. I'm recording this Thursday night after the Thursday night game. And so a little late. That's okay. I know you degenerates can have this show anytime. And truly, a Dynasty show, that the way that I do this show, doesn't matter if it's early in the week, late in the week. It really doesn't even matter because we're talking game theory. And this week, post week 4, right around week 5, obviously in the throes of week 5, you're probably listening to it over the weekend. It's time to start figuring out. So whether we're talking 4-0, 5-0, or 3-1, 3-2, or whatever the case, basically, I want to dive in to what we're doing with certain team structures and how to sort of behave and what you should be looking for and moves you should be making, all things of this nature. And I've got my co-host from the Dynasty Underground, which you should be listening to. I'm sure you are. Travis Seel with me, and we're going to just chit chat, talk it out. He's going to have player takes because that's what he does. I'm joking, but he does. And Miss Odunze, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. And yes, Mama knows, Jax. Mama knows. And I appreciate all the listeners for bearing with the late episode. That was definitely on my behalf, Jax.
Ooh, yeah.
Pushed you off twice, so I appreciate your patience too. Once I was feeling under the weather. The second
And the other
time it
time
was
you get on the hashtag team.
Yeah, I was on the hashtag team. It was my wife's birthday.
Yeah.
I'm still feeling a little under the weather if you can't tell by my voice, but the wife finished her birthday happy, if you know what I'm saying.
She
So
finished. Yeah.
yeah,
Her
there we
birthday.
are. There we are, Jax.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Her birthday, she finished.
it's interesting because I was telling you before the show that it's a little bit weird being a guest on your show again now that all of our work is just so intertwined with the Undroppables and we're doing Dynasty Underground and stuff like that. So kind of cool to be in it from this lens and not necessarily being co-hosting and West Coasting as I usually am on Dynasty Underground. So happy to be here from this side and excited to talk Dino Game Theory with you because I always learn a lot. I'm always able to kind of flip questions back on you and kind of talk through some things. And I say this on the Underground that you and Joe make me think about the things I'm doing and put kind of some context and some terminology around some of those dynasty moves. Whereas a lot of times I just kind of do them and I don't necessarily have a structure around exactly what I'm doing. But then you guys talk about it and it's like, hey, I do that actually. So always fun to get in the lab on the Undrafted.
Yeah, certainly. You know, it's funny you say that because Trav, the Dynasty Underground has been a perfect marriage between you, me, and Joe, where we all have a little bit of a different perspective, but the concentric circles kind of touch all the way around. It's not like we're so far away or so overlapping that it's kind of muted. But I think that's what's so cool is you know, we just have it's a great show. I really enjoy doing it. But the thing that we do get from each other so often is progress in the way we're thinking about things. And sometimes we don't exactly get there if we're just a little too deep in the lunch pails. But I think I think people probably prefer that part of the show anyway. So tons of fun, man. I'm having so much fun and you do such a great job. So thank you so much.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, it's just a good time to get in there with the boys. And I think, like you said, we all bring something different, kind of like a bit of a three-way Venn diagram. And I think personally, as the editor who listens through and puts it out, so maybe a little bit biased, I think at the center of that Venn diagram is really good Dynasty content for the people. And we've seen that in the reception from the people as well. So if you are listening to the Undrafted, please go check us out. It is another Undroppables production, so it's all in the family. Jax is on there as well. Joquavius Kuvatakis, I think, is an underloved Dynasty analyst in the community because he comes at it from really good angles as well. So yeah, just tons of fun, and it's really nice to have a nice little core to push forward with the Undroppables shows here.
Joe just riding my coattails is all he's doing.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, I meant to throw in there as well that it was hashtag never missionary, unlike one Joe Quavius Kuvatakis, as we were
Sure.
talking about my
Yeah.
wife's birthday gift. Yeah.
Yeah. Joe. I love Joe. He knows I think he's brilliant, and,
Yeah.
so, yeah, make that joke about Joe. Alright, so here's where I get started with this whole thing is, like, I think I watch dynasty leagues right now. I'm in 20 something of them, and I watch people properly reacting, overreacting, underreacting, misunderstanding their team. Like, I think the thing that I want to start with, and you can sort of dovetail off this, but people will look at their record and think that that's what their team is. And I see that, I'm like, you're not, like, I'll give you a couple of examples on both sides of the coin. I have a team that's 1-3, and I've shown you this team. We're not going to mention the trade I'm almost about to make because I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. But let's just say that I'm prepared to be aggressive with this team. I just did purchase Brees Hall to go onto that team with a projected late first. I'm hoping it's going to be a late first at the end of the day. But that team that I traded the first away for, or the first that owned that team, whatever, was 4-0. So it was the 4-0 team's first round pick from 2026. So in all likelihood, it should be a playoff team unless that team really tanks out. So I sold a playoff first and some other pieces for Brees Hall. Now I'm 1-3. I'm actually, I think, even like bottom 3 in max PF. You would think, what the hell are you doing pushing all in? Well, this is a Jordan Addison, Rashi Rice
Hmm.
team.
Hmm.
This is a team with multiple first round picks all over the place. It is a team that I bought, you know, uh, Olave with a first recently because I had 5 of them. Now I have 3 of them. I bought another piece with Brees Hall with the first, and now I'm actually putting some out there. I think I'd have to look at the team, but there's also some Amari DiMercado luck. I've really run into no injuries to speak of. JJ McCarthy, maybe. I've got everything kind of lined up to make this run with this team. And I don't mind spending, especially these
Hmm.
late firsts, on players that I can are also young, so they can help me move forward this year. If I can make a run, get into the playoffs, and get lucky and win the championship, that's one path. The other interesting thing, Trav, with this particular team is that as of right now, I own the 3 picks that are the 1, 2, 3 in least max
Standings.
PF.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I own, if the season were to end today, I have the 101, the 102, and the 103. That's probably not going to stick. But even if my team surges, I'm
Yeah.
really just pushing my other picks down anyway. It's
Totally.
not like I'm like, fuck, if I surge, I lose my draft position. I actually still am fine, even if I pass them and kind of flutter out a little bit. I position myself sort of perfectly in this league. But my point is that the max PF is against me, the record is against me, but yet I'm not moving all in. I'm not looking to sell those 3 picks. I can tell you that much.
Totally.
Not yet anyway, unless they're going to make some Godfather offers. But you get my point. That's an understanding of that team. I've also seen people with 4-0 teams or 3-1 teams that are straight dog doo doo that
Hmm.
basically got lucky with, name the players that like got hot here that probably won't stay hot the whole way, yada yada, a little bit of luck, and they're thinking they're invincible, whereas I wonder if they're even going to be 500 by the end of the year. And I think what this long-winded diatribe I just went on is to understand um what your team really is
Hmm.
and to act accordingly first and foremost. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think a lot of things about that. I think you did a couple of things with those trades there that you did. Um, just because I think like you said, they still have some of that youth, right? And I think what you did there is you look for difference makers. And I think no matter what your record is in Dynasty, you should always be looking for people who can fill those roster spots as difference makers. We got these guys like, Jacoby Myers or
Yeah,
receivers of that ilk who are putting up maybe like 10 to 14 fantasy points per game in a PPR setting. That's not really a difference maker. You know what I mean?
right.
It's a nice filler for your roster. But you want to look for those guys like a Brees Hall, like a Chris Olave if he hits. And Chris
Yeah,
Olave's hit, like maybe a few years ago, we would have seen his hit being a lot bigger. But I think his hit now versus what you're spending for him, because I know,
Right.
because you and I talked through that trade, that it was more than just a first for Chris Olave in that deal, in that you're getting a discount on what Chris Olave's a talent could be and what the hit could be if he does hit. So I love what you
Yeah.
did there, is because you had the wiggle room with those extra draft picks, and then you use those to try and find some of those different makers on your team. And I think it's so important, just because the assessment is the biggest part of all of this. The record doesn't matter. Seeing, player A, player X doesn't matter. It's well, I guess player A, player X does matter, but because of, seeing some of those difference making upside guys. And you got to really assess if you got there by luck, if you've got there
Yeah.
by studs, if you're one of those teams who's not doing good. Like your 1-3 team is a perfect example of a team that's not that far off and just maybe has hit a few bumps in the road. That's also a team that can contend next year as well, Jack. So I think that's where it was a bit twofold what you did with Olave and Brees Hall, is those
Right.
guys can be core pieces after this season. And so while you did buy those guys, you didn't necessarily just buy them because you want that championship run. They're not
Yeah, they're
guys that
not
expire.
mercenaries.
They
Right.
don't expire. They're not like a Devonte Adams type buy, right?
Yep.
And so I think you did really well there. And I think, like you said, it's just all about assessing, so to speak, the underground of the record
Mm,
that you have, to see how you got there and why you got there. And maybe if the floor could maybe fall out, you're not buying as hard, right? If you have a team with studs and you just need that one final piece, okay, maybe make that purchase, right? So yeah, I think it's all about assessing where your team is at and being realistic and kind of trying to attack the spots based on what your team's overall outlook can afford, right? You don't want to be selling away studs on a team like your 1-3 team. You're not going to sell away those studs just because you're a 1-3 team and you have a few studs. You're tooling around, right?
yeah.
It doesn't have to be one move to get you where you want to be next either, right? There's going to be multiple. So just stay patient.
Exactly. And so I think that when you're trying to make those moves, I think the biggest thing is being honest with what your team really is. Like, I'm actually in the Dynasty Game Theory Invitational. That's the team that, if, for those who've heard the story, I won 2 years ago. Last year, I lost when Brock Purdy hurt his elbow in the last game of the season, and I lost by point
Never heard
nine.
that one, Jax.
Never heard it. Yeah.
No.
Anyway, so that's a team that, I have high hopes for because it really could be a back to back champion. I want to win it again. So I've got like emotional investment into wanting to win that league again. And I've got Mike Evans, Terry McLaurin, and now Malik Neighbors on that team. And I was literally thinking, gosh, maybe I could make a little purchase here, get some production. And then I thought to myself, dude, you're lying to yourself. You just lost Malik Neighbors. You have two other wide receivers that are hurt. You're catching some bad luck. Like, there's other issues on that team that I have. Brock Purdy is another player on that team. Like, what do you really think you're doing? Like, be real with yourself and let's take a step back and maybe you go in a different direction. And I literally made that decision like yesterday or today. I was like, you're an idiot. And so that was just me sort of reckoning with myself. And ultimately, I'm not wrong to think that that team could potentially, maybe, sort of, kind of compete if, in fact, Mike Evans comes back and isn't hurt for the end of the season. Yada, yada. I mean, there's a lot of what ifs and coulda, woulda, should you, but the likelihood is that team's not going to do it. And so
Mhm.
I had to reckon with myself and then start changing the way I look at this team, start changing the communication, the conversations, the trade offers, the everything I'm doing in that league. And now I see the team totally different. I see the assets on that team totally different.
Mhm.
And it's because I looked at it with a fresh set of eyes instead of the emotionally scarred eyes that wants to fucking win that league really, really badly. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
so that's sometimes hard to admit. And especially if you're somewhat in the middle, it's harder to admit, especially if it's a team that's been good in past seasons. So I think that it starts with being honest with yourself and with the team.
Yeah, and it's like it's inherently hard to just not want to win, right? Like
Mhm.
your instinct on that team was to start buying and picking up some pieces, try and see if you could kind of finesse your way into a playoff spot or whatever, right? It's hard to do that. But that's kind of the game of dynasty, right? Is you've got to it's some teams you're just playing the long game. And that's maybe a benefit for you too, Jackson, in so many leagues where I'm actually still mad at you because I'm in way more leagues than I wanted to be in this year, and you're the one who you totally forced me into it. I did not
You're
have a
welcome.
choice in any of them. Um, yeah, where you have the benefit to kind of play around a little bit. Obviously, you're playing with buy-ins and money, but if you play in that many leagues, oftentimes it just kind of comes out in the wash, right? And so if you have a team that's just going to be middling year over year over year, kind of in the vein of finding that difference maker, tearing it apart is an effort to find those difference makers, right? Like
Yeah,
selling off some of the older guys is an effort to find those difference makers. I have a team here, Jax, actually I want to ask you about because
go for it.
this is this is a team no business being 3-1, but here we are. Okay.
Okay.
So my quarterbacks are
What's
Joe
the league?
Burrow.
What's the league
Oh
format?
yeah, sorry. It's the Invitational. Shout out UN Undroppables. It's a 14 team league, kind of just your normal no tight end premium, no real wacky scoring, pretty simple scoring.
Start. How many start?
Start two running back, three wide receiver, two flex, and super flex.
Okay.
My fast counting apparently isn't very good, but anyway, I'm
10.
looking at starting this week at wide receiver. I'm looking at Jalen Tolbert, Adam Thielen, DeAndre Hopkins, Terry McLaurin's on my bench. Joe Burrow and Brock Purdy have missed
Hmm.
time. Flacco's another quarterback that I've had. I am starting in the flexes, Kareem Hunt and Tyler Lockett. Like
Yeah.
this is bad. Rico
Yeah.
Dowdle and Jordan Mason are my running backs. Like it's not good. It's not good. 3-1 squad, but if you look at that squad, there's not a ton of sell pieces, right? And we don't necessarily have to go too deep into it, but I don't mind too much. These league mates probably
Well,
listen.
it's a
What are you
14
doing there?
it's a 14 team league.
Yeah,
Name your quarterbacks: Burrow, Purdy,
Goff,
Goff,
Flacco,
Flacco,
Rogers.
Rogers.
Rogers is a sell
Okay,
piece on that.
so look, having 5 starting quarterbacks in a league where it's a 14 team super flex is
That's good.
a huge number. And I had someone they were on Twitter and they mentioned something. They said if you're holding 3 starting quarterbacks in a superflex league, you're holding too much capital at the quarterback. Got to sell a quarterback and get some position pieces. And there's some strategy to that understanding, and there is some truth to what he's saying. In other words, you are carrying value at the quarterback position, but you're not playing them.
Mhm.
True, true. I don't necessarily ascribe to the strategy of selling off specifically, but I do think it's important to understand that you can sell down at quarterback in that scenario.
Mhm.
In your situation, you can literally sell off a quarterback,
Mhm.
especially probably should have been trying to sell Flacco for any goddamn thing
Yeah,
you could have
definitely.
before he
I
lost
fucked
his
up.
job because he's worthless now. You can't sell him for a fourth or fifth at this point.
No,
Flacco. I
no.
almost dropped Flacco in a superflex league, and I don't even think it's crazy because when are we when are we gonna
It's hard to see them going back despite if there's no injury,
like
because the
when? Like,
next guy in line's Shador.
Shador, and then he's 41 next year. He's gonna get a starting gig? Probably not. So then he's a backup of sorts. Is he a one for one backup to anybody in the league next year? Maybe. Does he just retire? Probably. Like, all
Probably he just sits it out and waits till somebody wants a starter, and then he
the
just goes
over
in
under on
and yeah.
future starts for Flacco is 1.5. I'm taking the under. Like, I don't think he's starting any more games in his career. So long story short, is that one's over. But with the other three, the Purdy, Burrow, Goff,
And
you could
Rodgers.
and Rogers. I mean, you could even sell off Goff.
Yeah.
Not crazy because then you still have Purdy, Burrow going into next year. So if you want to sell a
Mhm.
Goff and then just sort of tank out, you could do that. I don't think there's a way for you to compete. Who are you? You literally Jordan Mason is your RB1. Is that correct?
Mason, Dowdle, sorry, I have Jacobs, he's just on a bye right now,
Yep.
Aaron Jones, and that's it.
Yep. Wide
That's
receivers,
it.
best wide receiver. What's your wide receiver?
Terry
McLaurin.
McLaurin was my wide receiver 1, Kittle's on the IR at tight end.
Hmm. What
That's
else?
it,
What if you
buddy.
go wide receivers? Excuse me. Who else? Nothing.
Nothing. Thielen, Hopkins, Tolbert, Lockett, McLaurin, Wicks.
Hmm.
That's it.
Yeah. This is
Yeah,
a
this
this
was
is
an
a
orphan that I took over, and so I'm trying to rebuild it, but it's hard when you don't have much to sell.
In a 14 team league, everything feels a little bit thinner. You're always like, God dang, this team sucks, you know? And it's true. The one thing I will say about a 14 team, or even I'm in a 16 team league and I was tanking this year, tanking last year too, but you know, finally I've got like Genty and Caleb Williams, and because I've had the 101 a couple straight years, you know, just in the tank. But now the team is starting to get a little frisky because things are turning around for some of these players that I've drafted, you know.
Hmm.
Long story short is, you know, in a 14 or 16 team league, your team can sort of turn it around a little bit quicker unless there's a huge juggernaut in the league.
Hmm.
So I don't think selling Goff is crazy. You know, you're gonna have to really have some conversations with some teams too, because it's not just like put Goff on the trade block and someone's gonna come a calling. You kind of have to get creative, find a team that maybe is a quarterback short,
Hmm.
and you know could really use a quarterback, especially if there's someone like a Cam Ward that you could get back, where they're like, dude, I can't even start this guy.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you even sell the Rogers Goff to a team, both of them, that's a
Yeah.
quarterback short, and they give you a good quarterback back, you know,
Hmm.
but someone, I'm trying to think, even a JJ McCarthy, Cam Ward type, you know, where you get something back that they're just not getting anything from. They'd be a good team with that quarterback upgrade at that QB2 spot, and you get a
Youth.
quarterback back plus picks. You know,
Hmm.
even if someone's like, I couldn't give you a first, but I'll give you a slew of seconds. Chalk actually, welcome back, Chalk. Chalk actually had sent me a trade in a league where someone wanted Jackson Dart from him, and they sent over Purdy for Dart, and he was like, "Dude, I'm keeping Dart over Purdy." Maybe that's right, maybe that isn't. But then instead of sending him like Purdy plus a first, they sent like Purdy plus like 3 seconds and 3/3 or some shit, which felt
Mm.
like a complete overpay. But sometimes I guess the point there is that if you're looking to get something added and you ask for a first, a lot of times guys will say, nah, I can't do it. But if you ask for a slew of shit, just seconds and thirds and all
Yeah.
sorts of stuff like that, they'll just throw it all in there. And that can be a way for you to rebuild your team as well. Because even those seconds and thirds, as you get to those picks in subsequent years, Trav, you don't even have to make those picks. You can trade them. You know, a
Yeah.
lot of times when you're on the clock, you can trade the 208 for Mike Evans or some shit, you know? Then all of a sudden, you know, you throw a couple of veterans on the team, especially if you have a slew of second round picks. You can really use those to maneuver, especially in a 14 team league. So it's a long winded way of saying that I think you should explore what Goff can bring you, especially there's got to be some teams short on quarterback who are competitive.
Yeah, totally. And this is that heartstrings piece, right? It'd be almost throwing away a 3-1 record. Um, but I think that's a team where, when I start to piece and tool around, I can see that 3-1 record is lucky, and that I'm
Yeah.
probably going to be like a mid-pack team going forward. My elites are getting older in Kittle and McLaurin, Josh Jacobs as well. So yeah, that's a team that I got to do a little bit of turning over on. And if I can stack those draft picks, like you said, if you get a draft class that's where like 3 or 4 guys hit in a draft class, that's a quick turnaround. And so
Yeah.
excited to go and give those a whirl.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe selling Josh Jacobs
Oh yeah.
down, you know, to another running back plus a couple seconds, where you still kind of have a running back plus some draft capital. Same thing with Kittle. You know, maybe you can sell him down and get some draft capital. A little bit trickier there because uh, there's not that far down you can go before you're way the fuck down. You know,
Not
it's kind of
much. Yeah.
hard kind of hard. You
Yeah.
got to play it by there that one's got to play itself. Maybe even just get off tight end altogether. Maybe you sell Kittle for another wide receiver and some picks. You sell
Yeah.
down there. There's another strategy I was thinking about. I sold AJ Brown for basically for Jackson Dart and preseason before the season started. I look smart now, but I sold AJ Brown for Jackson Dart, and maybe I was smart then too, and Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt and something else for Sutton, all in the same thing. So I had AJ Brown, Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, and something else for Jackson Dart and Cortland Sutton.
Hmm.
And I know that the other uh, manager saw that as that. He didn't see it as AJ Brown for Sutton.
Mhm.
He saw it as AJ Brown for Dart. He saw that as that was what was happening. And then the other part of that was to even out the value. And I saw it completely different. I saw it as I'm selling AJ Brown for Cortland Sutton. And maybe I think that they're closer to the same value than the market. So I was buying or selling, however you want to look at it. I was utilizing and preying upon the value gap between Sutton and AJ Brown that exists in value, but that doesn't exist in age or production. And I felt like if you were telling me that Cortland Sutton outscores, AJ Brown over the next 3 years, possible. I wouldn't have
Mm.
said it's likely, but he's certainly mopping them right now. So it's certainly possible because it's happening. That's not to say that I think Cortland Sutton is a better football player than AJ
No.
Brown, but that doesn't even matter. I don't actually think that's who even cares about that in this context. We've seen both players as to what they can do over the course of multiple seasons. They've shown themselves. We already know what they are. So, but I just think there's an inherent value difference in that. And I think there's flatter tiers in the wide receiver position that can be exploited in those ways. Um, you know, Look at like Quentin Johnson and shit like that. Like if you had bought low on a lot of if you bought the dips on
Mhm.
all these sort of borderline players, Jacoby Myers, is another one. Like it's constantly available. You could always just sell down to Jacoby Myers and you might get the same production out of Jacoby Myers as you did from, well, Chris Olave or something like that, right?
Mhm.
And so being able to sell in those gaps but preserve your production is what I basically did. And I think that that's something that you can do at the wide receiver position. Hard for you to do because all your wide receivers suck. But maybe with Terry McLaurin, maybe. But Terry McLaurin's sour milk right now too because he's
Yeah.
hurt. But if he goes off and has a couple of big weeks with Jaden Daniels, maybe you even hit up the Jaden Daniels manager and say, Broski, this guy's
Yeah.
going fucking off since the injury. Let's go. So I think, where there's guys who are valued really high, but their performance, their production is not going to necessarily dwarf someone who's much further down in the quote unquote dynasty ranks. That's where you want to use those value differences to gain more value, i.e., in this case, fucking Jackson Dart.
Yeah, I know
You know what I mean?
that trade is fantastic for you. The guy's your namesake for crying out loud. And
Mm,
I think there's a lot of ways that you can do it too, right? Like you don't have to necessarily go to a guy who's been around for a while who has maybe a little bit of negative perception on him, like a Cortland Sutton. While I do think that there is maybe a wider gap between AJ Brown and Cortland Sutton, despite what they're doing this year, I think some of that can shake out. But I think you can buy some of these younger guys like Jaden Higgins that we like, Trey
yep.
Harris that we like. So if you're in like me on that team that's 3-1, if I'm choosing to sell some of those pieces, maybe I'm trying to move down to some of those guys. Maybe look at some of those running backs that we liked, like a DJ Giddens or a Jarquez Hunter. Maybe those are pieces of the puzzle that you bring back to kind of insulate selling what you're selling. And you can kind of give yourself a little bit more runway for that roster because those guys aren't probably going to hit this year. But I think 2-3 years down the line, if they can blossom, you've got a nice little core there. Kind of like what we were talking about with stacking those draft picks and having some of them hitting. If you can do this and have some of the guys that you get back as quote unquote throw-ins on the
Yeah, I was
trades
going to say they got to be
be
throw-ins. But
hits,
yes,
right?
absolutely.
Because I
Yep.
think some like DJ Giddens, depending on the manager, might see no production and be willing to get rid of him. Jarquez hasn't done a whole lot whatsoever. You might be able to get him. I still like Devin Neal, and he hasn't done a whole lot either. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be those aging guys that you bring into your team or whatever in a buying situation. You can get these guys and you can still feel like you got that return.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I mean, DJ Giddens was actually dropped in the Scott Fishbowl in my league, and this is a running back heavy league where you certainly want to have a running back. He's a straight handcuff to JT. Like I see no reason for him not to be rostered. So as soon as he got dropped, I picked him up. But to your point, that players like that, Jarquez too. I don't think he's rostered for sure. Probably almost any SFBs. So why do I mention the SFB and redraft? I think those are deep redraft leagues, meaning nobody has any hope for them this year. Nobody's like, dude, they're going to come on. There's no hopium tied to those types of players, so they're easy to get thrown in. Yet
Mhm.
as you like to say, oftentimes the asymmetrical upside is huge. If JT were to get a high ankle sprain, DJ Giddens is like, holy
Oh
shnikes. I
man.
mean, he could be an RB1 for crying out loud. I mean, that's
Trey
the
Benson until he went down, right? That's
yes.
exactly what
So,
happened with Trey Benson, and it almost worked out. Almost
yep.
worked out.
That would have been a great sell right before the week he starts. I mean,
That's exactly what I was starting to think too. Like we should
yeah.
probably just start selling him for that first now.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, we talked about it on the program.
Yeah,
We
that's
said,
right.
you can't get a first, but if you can, do it. If you can
Yeah.
get a single first for, for Trey Benson before that, you would do it. Um, it's just like the Ja'Cory Krosky merit. We forget so quickly how everybody sort of hopiums things up and down, and that's where you want to take advantage of the value, especially right now if you're a rebuilder. You're right. You want to take advantage of all the forgotten misfit toys. Terrence
Yeah.
Ferguson had a nice little night tonight. He had a
Oh
couple nice
yeah.
catches, right? And so, like, I think I sold him in the Brees Hall trade, and I'm like, it's
Yeah.
like, oh,
It's a little
God,
sad.
why did I get rid of him? But some of these, some of the time it's easy to sell them when you haven't seen it. I haven't
Mhm.
seen him do anything, so it's easy to sell. And so as a buyer, sometimes you're like, nah, I don't really want him because he hasn't done anything. Those are the types of guys you want to lean into for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, I like those guys, and I think you can really shore up your depth too, right? I think a lot of what I'm doing on some of these teams that are competing is trying more so to shore up the depth as opposed to locking in a new guy that's in a starting roster spot. Because if that team is 4-0, it's probably got a pretty good starting roster. You got to look at those potentially weak spots on your bench and try and fill those up with, like I said, difference makers, right? And so, who are your churn players? So, the guys that
Yeah.
easily can just be maybe replaced on the waiver wire. Who are some of the guys that you want to sell away? Who are some of the guys you're willing to throw in? And then you can just kind of really attack it that way. If you're on one of those 4-0 teams and you don't want to maybe trade, like say you're doing an upgrade and you don't necessarily want to trade your first round pick plus wide receiver 2 to move up to one of those elite guys, because you don't necessarily, that's your only first round pick, you don't have any other ones, then you might be able to just get by with finding some of these guys who can go on your bench, and maybe they are like a Jameson Williams type who is going to have those pop-off weeks but not as much consistency, because maybe you catch him in a run of consistency and you get a little bit of a discount in that trade or something
Yeah.
like that. So finding the pockets really, and it's all like, it's kind of a cop out as an analyst on a podcast, but it's very, very, very league specific, right? Like
Yeah.
who's going to make trades when, what's the activity look like, who's tied to who, right? Like home leagues, there's so many more players who are just tied to guys that are on their favorite
Yeah.
team,
For no good
right?
reason.
I do
Exactly.
it in home leagues too. This is a home league, whatever. I'm going to draft a couple of Eagles because I like fun.
Yeah.
And so they all do that. So knowing that stuff and being in tune is something that we always preach to.
So I'm gonna do something. I've got a perfect segue, but I'm gonna break the segue by paying some bills and taking a quick break. Welcome back to the program. Trav, I said I had a great segue. I ruined it because I did that whole break thing, but I'm here with Travis Seel, and I had a segue, but I ruined it. Ruined the segue. So
That's okay.
what are you gonna do? I don't really care. People are
Yeah.
wondering what Jax, get on with it. Tell us the goddamn segue. No, I'm not gonna tell you the segue.
They'll
Fuck
never
you,
know.
They'll never
Yeah.
know. No, I'm gonna tell you anyway. Whether you like it or not. Pause it. I don't care. Shut it off. Get out of here. I didn't want you anyway. Here's the segue. I'd put out a tweet about hey, ask us some questions. There was a question that I wanted to answer, excuse me, that had a little bit of something to do with where we're at right now in this conversation. And the question is basically, hey, tell me about roster construction, especially in regards to the bottom half of your roster. And it's a smart question because roster construction, what does that even mean? Well, it means what in general should you be doing with a roster, um, and how should you base it? What's the optimal setup? And I keep hearing my good friend Scott Connor, who I think is one of the greatest dynasty minds out there. We love to pod together. We love to challenge each other. I love to hear him talk about it because it starts to get the neurons firing in my brain to get me more creative about the things I think about dynasty. And a couple things he says. Number one is, if you don't have a plan for a player, what's he doing on your roster? It's a pretty fair question. It's what got me thinking about dropping Joe Flacco. So I was
Mhm.
like, I want to pick something up. I forget what it was, something. And I'm like, I could drop Joe Flacco. There's other pieces on my team I could drop, and I'm like, I could drop Joe Flacco. I have no plan for him. There's no way to trade. I've put out there I'll take a fifth for him. No offers, obviously. No one's offering a fucking thing for Joe. Nobody would probably pick him up. Maybe someone would pick him up. Maybe that would put something else on the waiver wire that I like. I don't even know. Point of the matter is, I didn't have a plan. I almost dropped Joe Flacco. I might in the future. But do you have a plan for that player? And he actually mentioned on his most recent podcast that the answer to that is, well, I have to roster somebody. True. You do have to roster somebody. But if that's your only reason, you could roster somebody else.
Mhm.
So maybe it's somebody else that you should roster. And I know in a lot of leagues I play in, and you play in with me, Trav, it's deep, and there's ain't nothing on the waiver wire. But when you're trading, as you're talking about, when you're making these trades, you should be considering your roster construction. And I will speak to this because it's another Scott Connorism that, he sort of won me over with one of our, arguments, conversations, whatever you want to call them, podcasts, a few years ago now, about optimal roster construction. And I totally understand it. And once it clicks in your brain, it's so much better. In Trav's league that he was talking about, I heard a lot of wide receivers that I don't want to start,
Mhm.
you know, and he probably has some on the bench that are worse than that. I'm just guessing because a lot of us do. But optimally, you want to have just a few more wide receivers than you can potentially even start.
Mhm.
Because once you get past that, even if someone else gets hurt, you really are just playing. Whether it was Kendrick Bourne or Jamari Thrash, Kendrick Bourne just went off, but he was not more valuable than even Jamari Thrash. Like those guys are irregular. There's no really rhyme or reason. But the running backs, you can always predict.
Mhm.
Very easy to predict because if Corum and Kyron Williams are hurt, it's Jarquez Hunter. Jarquez
Mhm.
Hunter is going to go off. We know it. You can comfortably put him in. This happened with Kenny Gainwell. Kenny Gainwell hasn't had a
Yeah.
30-point game in since fucking Memphis. But as soon as if you woke up on time, which I didn't, to get Jalen Warren out of your lineup properly, which I did not, then
Same.
you would have easily popped Kenny Gainwell in the lineup and been like, let's roll. You can't do that as much at the wide receiver position. So that's the thing. Once I'm so deep at wide receiver, meaning I've got all my starting spots and as many flexes as there are. Generally, depending on the league, you play in most PPR leagues. If you're playing in some sort of standard league or some sort of point per carry league, you're probably even going to play more running backs in the
Yeah.
flexes. So you certainly don't need a whole lot more than your starting roster. Meaning, if you start 3 wide receivers, 3, and then if there's 3 flexes, 6 total wide receivers, you only need 7 or 8. I mean, you
Yeah.
can roster more than that, but why, right?
No, you're
But
totally right.
if you have running backs, just running Kenny Gainwell and Samaje Perine and Antonio Gibson and name all the Brian Robinson, Garendo, just boom, 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 boom. You're never playing them until you're playing them with a ton of pride. And there's a lot. Amari DiMercado and Michael Carter.
Dude,
We're gonna
Michael
be
Carter.
we're gonna
I
be
love it.
playing these guys confidently this week. You know, these guys were on the waivers. I mean, I play in leagues where I picked up Michael Carter everywhere, and I'm starting him in a few spots.
Yeah,
Um,
dude.
but here's the point: he should have been rostered over Jamari Thrash. Like I
Yes.
should have had Michael Carter, as dirty and down and awful as Michael Carter was. He had a higher chance of going into my lineup than Jamari Thrash ever will.
Yeah, for sure. The path is just so much shorter for these guys. And, um, when you look at the wide receiver position, role, usage, alignment, all of that stuff kind of comes way more into play. Whereas a running back just needs to be able to take the ball and run with it.
That's it, baby.
Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that. And there's a lot more talent and skill involved in it than that I will never, ever know. And then you bring in, of course, the passing game, which is where ultimate upside is realized. Look at a guy like Woody Marks. Jax is
Yeah.
a guy that we thought was only a pass catcher, pretty steep hill to climb, probably wasn't going to be getting many carries as was.
Bell
But
cow.
look at him, and now he's just
Right.
dingling the bell out in the farm. So
Yep.
we look at a guy like Kendre Miller. We've been kind of looking at him for a couple years behind Alvin Kamara,
Hmm.
right? And he's starting to pop off a little bit because Alvin Kamara is getting older and Kendre
Yes.
Miller is. So it's easier to have a plan for those guys, right? It's easier to be able to have a plan for those running backs. And yeah, kind of like you said, those other two wide receivers, maybe three wide receivers on your bench, or maybe one of those guys you can start, and a couple of them are guys that you maybe have a plan for. Like I'm looking at my dynasty rankings right now, Jax. I'm doing an overhaul. You'll be very proud of me. I'm doing a big overhaul, and I'm doing it in the way that you kind of explained to me, where you take out all the players, put in groups of players, and then just keep putting in groups. You have less things to look at. It's less confusing. So I'm going to publish that probably a little bit later this week just because of the way that I did it. There's a lot of players that aren't in there right now or whatever. But a guy that I'm looking at that's pretty tricky rank is Jalen McMillan. And
Mm,
I like Jalen McMillan. I think you can have a plan for a guy like that because you look at Mike Evans aging. Chris Godwin did just sign that new contract, but he's been getting injured. Team that plays 11 personnel a lot. So there can be a plan for some of those guys. And that's why
yes.
maybe there are some wide receivers that I would say you can pick and choose. But
Yes.
I would say like a Jalen McMillan on your bench is a different type of pedigree and expectation than a guy like you said, Jamari Thrash,
Sure.
who is
And Jamar,
maybe a dart throw.
what's crazy about Jamar is he's actually running routes. So like he's
Yeah.
playing like 60 or 70% of the
He's
snaps.
Cedric Tillman almost, pretty much Cedric
It's
Tillman.
crazy. I mean, he's
Yeah.
getting nothing in terms of targets, and so you look at a guy like that and go like, when will I play him? He's playing. He's on the field. No interest.
No.
Nobody's throwing him the ball. I have no interest in. Why is he on my team? Like I get it. He's ahead of somebody in my dynasty ranks on a deep team where, and I look at the waivers and I'm like, dude, there's a bunch of garbage here. I probably should, and it's hard to do it to take a guy who's not on a roster at running
Yeah.
back, who's literally a free agent. I don't even know. Pick someone who's out there that I don't. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Over a guy running, playing 70% of the snaps for a team right now is a hard thing to do, but it probably is the more wise thing to do. In one league, I think I picked up Derek Carr for him. Right? It was like
Interesting. Yeah.
I'd rather have Derek Carr than Jamari
Come out of
Thrash.
retirement. Yeah, for sure. For
If he
sure.
comes out of retirement, he's the quarterback 15.
Totally, totally. And like I think there's a fine line too, right? Because I don't think either of us would advocate for like churning players just to churn players. But I think even if, say, you have that Jamari Thrash player on your team, just know that that's your guy that needs to be churned, right? You need
Yeah.
to get that guy off of your roster. So any opportunity you can, you need to almost have like a little flag in the back of your mind for that, to be able to try and fill that roster. Maybe you have a trade where it's a 2-for-1 and you get the two, where you fill that roster spot and Jamari Thrash is the drop as well. So there's different ways to go about it other than those very, very thin waiver wires in our
Yeah.
dynasty leagues.
Yeah, they can be thin sometimes, but again, I will search deep and find someone who has a better story. Like if this and then that, maybe this, like a Michael Carter who was, I think he was almost non-rostered. Maybe he was like on the
I had him in a few.
no the Arizona practice squad. In other words, he was
Oh yeah, yeah,
almost not on a fucking roster. I mean, he's
yeah.
borderline. I mean, especially when it was DeMarcado, Benson, and Connor, he was not dressing,
No,
that's for sure. He was
no.
not on the team. So, but better than Jabari Thrash for sure to have on
Yeah,
your roster,
definitely.
as it turns out. And, you know, that's the kind of the thing is there's no conundrum with those guys. They're either deep bench stashes or thrust into your starting lineup potentially because they're going to get 70% of the running back touches in a given week, and that's all you're looking for is playable weeks from that position. I also really like having the deep backup quarterbacks. Any backup quarterback I want to roster. I just said I got Derek Carr. I don't necessarily like. I'm looking at my Sam Howell. I've noticed Sam Howell was dropped in a couple spots. I have a couple of Drew Locks where I'm looking at like, can I drop Drew Lock? And then I
Mhm.
think if Darnold got hurt, it's actually quite possible they go to Drew Lock
Yep.
because they would say we're a good team. Drew Lock's a vet. We're gonna try and see about Milrow, but if Milrow's not ready, they're not just gonna throw him in there as the quote unquote backup. I actually think that's why Locke is there. I think he's actually maybe I'm wrong, but maybe he's the number 2 there. Anyway, without knowing exactly what they're gonna do if Darnold gets hurt, I'm kind of holding Locke over some other things because like, well, and here's the reason why. I've got a number of teams where whether it's Brock Purdy, like right now, the Brock Purdy team, I don't have Mac Jones, but I do have Carson Wentz. It's the
Mhm.
same fucking thing. So
Mhm.
thank God I had Carson Wentz, because when Brock Purdy got hurt, Carson Wentz, they got hurt together. If I'd had Mariota, I had Mariota in another league where I lost JJ McCarthy, I think. So I lose McCarthy, I had Mariota, and actually Mariota was better. So, to have the backups, even if they're not your backups, a lot of times it can just the general look, it worked for me in a few places where the general situation was I lost a starter but had another backup that was playing for a different team. It was great. So whether you trade these guys or you just simply throw them into your lineup, they're very, very valuable at the running back and quarterback position because they're almost one for one. Tight ends are not like that, and wide receivers are
No.
not like that. And the reason is they have to earn targets. Whereas a quarterback, I've said it a million times, he's going to play 100% of the snaps, man. He's going to be in there the whole time. So that's super important to understand at the quarterback and running back position. So I think that's definitely what I'm looking to do is just acquire any quarterback that is likely the guy going in getting 100% of the snaps if the first guy gets hurt.
Yeah, yeah, you're spot on there. Like a lot of my rosters are deep running backs and quarterbacks who your league mates will be like, "Why the fuck is that guy on
Yeah,
a roster?"
gross.
Like
Nick
A-
Mullins or some shit,
Andy
man.
Dalton is on
Yeah,
too many of my rosters still.
yeah.
Yeah, you just got to have those guys because
Jimmy Garoppolo. I've got
not
like 12
only
Jimmy Garoppolos.
not only are those 12 Jimmy Garoppolos potentially going to fill a super flex spot for you when Stafford goes down. Sorry, if Stafford goes down, that was rude.
Yeah, don't do that.
Sorry. Um, if Stafford goes down, you got at least 12 second round picks that you could acquire with those Jimmy Garoppolo shares
Yeah,
for a team who is desperate in a playoff hunt. And so, yeah, I think that's good. I will say, Jax, I am a bit of a sucker for those failed, super talented wideouts who continue to get
yeah,
shots. Even the tight ends, too. Like, I still got lots of Dalton Kincaid, who is looking pretty decent this season. So I
yeah.
might say, um, but yeah,
Well,
like
tight
even
end, I
like,
I
I
I
hung
kinda
on to Terrace
disagree.
Marshall for way too
Yeah.
long. I hung on to Terrace Marshall way too long. Tight end, maybe not so much.
Well, here's the
Um,
thing though, Trav. I'm gonna give you Terrace Marshall. For every Terrace Marshall and Jalen Rager, there's a Quentin Johnston. You
True that.
know, and I'm not, I think Quentin, I was going to do a little deep dive on Quentin. I'm probably going to do this when I have some time to see if there was something that we should have seen coming because, he was roundly referred to as a bust, especially when they drafted Trey Harris. They're like, oh, they hate him. There was a lot of narrative based on the fact that Quentin was dead. But I guess to my point there is that you do have to kind of take a little bit of pedigree with it too. He was a first round pick.
Yeah,
I know Terrace Marshall was a second. Rager was a
second, yeah.
first. So these guys are pedigree too, and they failed. I get that. You're going to miss some too, but you do want to see it through. What's that? 3 years? Something like that.
That's
So
like that's
yeah,
one thing that I've been finding with the dynasty the average dynasty gamer over the last few years is people are quitting so fast on player
yes,
stacks. And I think um maybe it's a product of 2025 and people's short attention spans, but like
yep.
a guy will be 5 games into his career and people are just talking about how he's dead. And it's
Genty.
just really hard to get into that. It's like and even some of the guys that we talked about, and this isn't like a got you guys to you and Joe or anything like that, but even some of the guys that we talk about where it's like we've talked about this. We had our evaluations for a reason and we're deciding whether we need to hold fast on them. And I tend to lean towards my evaluation pre-draft and allow that to play out a little bit before I will call it anything, right? Because if I was bullish on a guy and he goes into a team that's a bad situation, I'm not going to dock him as much for not producing. Other than aside from like a guy like maybe Marvin Harrison, who went in there with like a ready-made quarterback. And he has had some ups and downs. He's performing okay this year. And I think Kyler is still a big problem for him, but that's where some of that pedigree, I guess, comes into play as well. Whereas the expectations of guys are really, really high.
Yeah.
But I think even if they're that high, we just need to hold fast a little bit because we evaluate, like, I know that we on the underground spend hours and hours and hours digging into these rookies. And so I'm not ready to throw out all that work necessarily just because a couple of dominoes didn't fall a guy's way.
I think that's right. I mean, you got to look at it both ways. I think one way is to, definitely not quit too early. The other thing is to not be so
Yeah.
stuck to your priors that you miss the off ramps, the exit ramps that exist on all these players, you know. And look, you got to make a call. I would have probably been the one selling Quentin Johnson, as I didn't have a ton of shares and I sold
Mhm.
very early on. And um yeah, you know, was I wrong? Probably not. I sold early enough where I think I got Devonte Adams for him or something like that. So,
That's pretty sick.
you know, that was like early in his first year, you know, and it was like just 2 bad games. I'm like, I'm not so sure about. But long
Mhm.
story short, you know, is you got to make a call. But I think you're right. There's a DFS sort of mentality, you know, to Dynasty where people are just like playing week to week, and you know they're very reactionary. And it's a remote control generation now. It's a smartphone generation, right? You know,
Yeah,
right?
and
It's
I think
immediate,
a return for you like Devonte Adams makes this hit in 2025 for Quentin Johnston a lot easier to stomach because maybe you
right,
made that piece and won a title out of it or something, right?
right,
By
right. Yeah,
trading away Quentin on that. So I mean, you know, cut yourself a little bit of slack, Dynasty gamers,
yeah.
and realize that, you know, you got something out of that guy who's hitting on somebody else's roster now, and hopefully that something paid off for you.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just got to ride it through. I mean, selling Quentin Johnston for, you know, nothing in the offseason, you know, probably not the way to go. Certainly now not. I'm sure there's a lot of sour QJ sellers, you know, over the past, you know, 6 months who just are like, oh my God, I can't fucking believe this guy finally hit after I had finally given up of, you know, after so much time. So,
He's a
um,
guy that just kinda rotted on my rosters for a little while because I wasn't even putting him out there for feelers just because it's like, what are you gonna sell him for? Former first round pick, right? Failed first round pick. Maybe I thought he'd have to move on to see this, but, pretty incredible what he's doing.
So I've got a couple questions. We'll hit a few listener questions. You know, this one. All right. So from Will Henley, Will says when evaluating the relative strength of draft classes, everybody says 26 is weak and 27 is strong. Does that impact anything more than the top 5 players in the class? Top 10? Is a random 27 second or third any more valuable than a 26, or does it really only impact the early firsts? I would answer this with I don't know, right? Meaning there are people that are probably more well qualified to answer that specific question than me. What I will say from the knowledge base that I have is that I don't want to try and be too cute. I don't want to be too cute. Look, maybe I lean 27 first versus 26 first because I hear it's a better class. But I don't want to try and figure it all out today, because I will tell you there was a point where Zach Evans was the first certain top 5 pick in the in
Great
the rookie
pull.
draft.
Great
Right? He
pull.
was. Remember, we were like,
Mhm.
dude, Zach Evans. That's the reason you need to go get that pick, whatever year he was. You know, you need to get in on the Zach Evans thing with Tank Bigsby and blah, blah, blah. You know, I was like, and no, that was wrong. That's incorrect. I mean, who knew it? You know, Sean Tucker, Zach Evans, Tank Bigsby. That class is going to be awesome. No, it's not. It just wasn't. So I think a lot of times, you know, you really want to be a little bit careful of being so certain. Now, is Jeremiah Smith going to be awesome? Yes, I'm very,
Mhm.
very sure of it. That's so. Does it? I guess to answer your question, it probably only impacts the top 5. But look, Roma Dunze came from nowhere. I mean, not nowhere, but somewhat nowhere. Joe Burrow came from nowhere.
Mhm.
You know, sometimes these players, we don't necessarily see them coming, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit! Even Ashton Genty, bro, that was a come from nowhere type of player.
Mhm.
Maybe a 2 year understanding of Genty, but he was not the 101 in that class the year before he came out. He just
Yeah.
wasn't. Um, excuse me. So I think you got to be a little bit more ready to be wrong in those situations. And I think there's probably a value to be had in the ones that people don't want. You know, can you trade your 27 first for a 26 first plus plus? Maybe. Is that a good
Yeah.
trade? Probably. We don't
Probably,
actually
yeah.
know. And I'm not saying that I am advising that. I don't know. I'd be open to it though. And I think that'd be the key, is that just be open to being a little bit wrong about all that.
Mhm. I think for me, I actually would probably lean towards just if it's one for one, first for first, I would probably lean more towards the one that's happening sooner, so the 26, And the reason for that is that that pick is going to see its value spike a lot sooner than the
Sooner.
27. And
Yep.
so, you have a lot of time in that time frame where you can acquire other 27 firsts. You could even maybe use that 26 first when everybody gets draft fever to parlay into a 27, depending on what you see out of
Plus.
that draft
Yep.
class, right? And so I feel like taking the draft pick that happens sooner allows you to maybe wait and see on that draft class that we're talking about a little bit longer, right, than that 27. And I think as far as like the overall draft class, it is definitely an I don't know. I'm not somebody who's scouting these guys this soon into like the NFL season, I guess.
Right.
But I think what we do know is that there's probably only 3 to 5 mega difference makers at the top of those classes. And so, if you can find a way to get in there, we're seeing this year, we thought there was a lot more, but some of these guys are having a little bit rockier starts than we thought in some of those running backs. So, it's really about picking those spots, but I tend to like taking the sooner value, if that terminology makes
In
sense.
general, no, in general for sure, because it's there for you. There was yeah, for sure. And the 27 class is almost certainly going to be better than the 26 class. That's so if one for one, if someone's like, yeah, you can have my 27 or my 26, I'd
Yeah,
probably just on balance take the 27 right now. But that's not generally the case. That's in this one more outlier
specific.
situation.
Yeah.
A lot of times we see that, the CD Lamb, Justin Jefferson class, which was JT and DeAndre Swift, that class was the same thing. We knew it was going to be dope. Like there's certain classes you see coming, you're like, no, you probably want to get in on this class. And more often than not, we're right about that in a general sense. But yeah, so I would say, but I don't think it goes too much deeper than that. If someone's willing to sort of overpay for the right to be in the 27 second versus a 26 second, they're going to pay you lots to do it. Sure, take the fucking profit.
Mhm.
Another question we got here, which is dovetailing a little bit. With something you were talking about from Satoshi. He's
Ah,
got the
big
black.
fan, big
He's
fan.
got the
Satoshi.
black. You
Yeah,
know, uh, circle, like whatever is the avatar, it's just
yeah,
blacked out. So he
yeah.
does almost like he
Satoshi's a
doesn't
big
have one.
supporter.
Yeah, he's cool. So when to pivot off a young stud that is disappointing and recouping the value while you can, Lad or BTJ? I'll let you go first on this. I've got something to say about this.
This is hard because those two examples specifically are ones where we are in the epicenter of them, right? And it's hard because when you're thinking about pivoting is when the value is a lot lower, right?
Bingo.
And it's hard because you kind of need them to see a stretch of consistency to be able to recoup, right? I don't think like BTJ having one great game next week isn't going to bring his value up to like preseason values. He's going to need a couple for us to see it with Trevor and this new offense, I think, for him to regain that value if I was a seller. So it's kind of a hard thing to get off of. And I think it comes down a little bit to how much you believe in the talent and
So correct.
how much you believe that that guy is going to be able to turn it around and maybe transcend a bad situation. Um, Sometimes looking at maybe contract situation to see if that guy's locked into that situation or is going to maybe have an out. Those are situations where you can really see a value spike because that guy, his next team is just TBD, right? And so people might want to get off that thinking he's going to a worse situation. But if you believe in a talent, then maybe that situation isn't as bad as your league mates might see. And so there's a lot of talent evaluation into it. And a lot of striking while the iron is hot too, because you can miss those windows a lot if your talent eval isn't correct, right?
Yeah.
And that guy is not going to end up panning out. Then you really got to find that pocket because he's going to see that downturn potentially, whereas you just thought it's going to be all upturn.
Yeah, and I think you're right on the money. I love everything you said there. I'm going to dovetail this one in there. Hector Martinez asks, "We know our love for neighbors, but what do you do if you're win now?" And the one thing I would say here with both of these questions is patience. Patience, patience, patience. Just relax. At 4-0, you don't have to solve Malik Neighbors. At 2-2, you don't have to solve Malik Neighbors today. You do have the value of time. You get to decide whenever the hell you want. What if you continue winning with Malik Neighbors on your IR. Okay, well, great. The guy I elevated was Keenan Allen or Quentin Johnston, or you get my drift. In other words,
Mhm.
the guy that I put up there ends up outperforming his. I threw a Kendrick Bourne in there this week. Well, look at that, doing good. Maybe there's a way for you to solve it without getting rid of Malik Neighbors. Maybe you'll have to. Maybe you should. Maybe you can explore that. But I would not panic sell any of these assets, Lad, BTJ, Neighbors, none of them. Because invariably, if you're panic selling, that means you're selling at the bottom. And not only are
Mhm.
you selling at the bottom, but you're also giving up max value because you were panicking. If I'm going to sell Neighbors, I asked for a fucking haul in
Oh,
that
yeah.
one league that I lost Neighbors, because it's like, yeah, give me a lot of shit. I think I asked for like Scatabo, Nico Collins, something else, Mac Jones,
Yep.
and something else. Oh, Jordan Addison. I was like, yeah, you're gonna in a first, and I'll give you Mike Evans. I asked for a lot, and it was a straight overpay. And the guy was like, "That's kind of a lot." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know. You don't want to pay a lot. You don't want Malik Neighbors. That's the
Yeah,
answer.
exactly.
You either want to pay me a lot or you don't want Malik Neighbors. Same thing even with Lad and BTJ. I'll sell them at their value, not below their value,
No.
because so that's that. Or as Trav pointed out, if you don't believe in them, well, maybe that's different. If you're like, dude, I think Lad's he's just dog shit. He's just going to be glorified Hunter Renfro. This guy's nothing. Get him off my roster, then sell him for whatever you can and move on. Because you only think it's going to get worse anyway.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's your call to play it as it is. But for these guys, BTJ, who I was skeptical of coming out, I felt wrong. Now I feel a little bit right, but I'm still not really certain because I've seen him be awesome and I've seen him
Yeah.
struggle. So I think it's probably somewhere in between, where obviously Mac Jones is a kingmaker. He did it with Kendrick Bourne again tonight. Mac Jones, kingmaker, baby. You know what I'm
Yeah,
talking about,
it's
boys.
impressive.
But you
It's
get my
impressive.
point here that, I would just be patient, relax. Don't panic sell anything, because
Mhm.
you're just giving up value for no reason. See what you can do with your team, especially a wagon. Maybe your wagon keeps rolling without Malik Neighbors. It's very possible.
Totally. What is the hole that you're trying to fill by selling Malik Neighbors? Can that hole be filled elsewise? So maybe in that situation is where, okay, maybe that's where my second round pick comes on the table and another player on my team to try and fill that hole instead
Keenan.
of Malik Neighbors. Exactly. Right.
Right.
Sell those guys to fill that hole, because if your team is 4-0, Malik Neighbors was not your only piece. Right.
No, I mean,
And
you get
so,
Keenan Allen, if you
yeah,
have a hole.
exactly.
It's like,
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I
So
mean,
you can
he's
fill those.
35 years old.
You can fill those without selling a guy who's going to come back and be a top 3 dynasty wide receiver,
Right.
who now has a quarterback in Jackson Dart, and a team that's looking like it's going to be nice around him going forward. And so I think that's another thing as well, is like selling off a Malik Neighbors is a little at a discount is way too short-sighted, because you have Malik Neighbors who's just in his second year for the next 5 to 10 years on your dynasty roster. And so this one year, especially with the way we've seen ACL recoveries progress over the last few years, like Chris Godwin's on the field like less than it, like he's like 8 to 9 months after he tore his or something like that, or one of the wide receivers anyway. But yeah, I think Malik Neighbors comes back and is elite, elite, elite. And so you don't sell for too much off of that.
Agree. All right, let's do that. I'll give you this one, player take, right? And I love this one. Duncan, how do you pronounce Baird? Baird?
Baird.
Beard?
Yeah,
Baird?
I have a good friend actually with the same last name.
Well, say it
Baird.
right, Duncan
Baird.
Baird.
Yep.
All right. I'll say it right, Duncan. Garrett Wilson or Marvin Harrison Jr.? What a great question. I've got
Mother
an
of
answer.
God.
I've got an answer.
Okay,
What do
hit
you got?
it.
Nope,
Okay,
you first. I've got mine locked in.
I have Garrett Wilson at 12 and Marvin Harrison at 14 in my dynasty rankings revamp,
I'll
with
take Garrett
Emeka
Wilson.
Egbuka sandwiched in between them.
I love Garrett Wilson here. I mean,
Yeah.
they're both great wide receivers. I just think that Garrett Wilson more closely prototypes to the the players that we've been seeing dominate, these target hogs. It's funny. I was watching The Ringer, I guess, or maybe it was Bill Simmons talking with it's Craig Horlbeck or whatever, the guys from The Ringer. And they were saying, look, wide receiver was just a wasteland, this, that, and the other. The only guys doing anything are JSN, Puka, and what's the last one? Who else is doing something? Someone else. Why can't I remember? But
Amon-Ra?
Amon-Ra, right? Amon-Ra. So it's Amon-Ra, Puka, and JSN. And I'm like, those are kind of my guys. Those are the guys I'm talking about. Not because I'm like, I knew it or whatever, nothing like that. But because I said I go after targets. And those guys are getting fucking targets. Like, hello, that's what you want. You want as many targets as humanly possible. A guy like, BTJ or, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, even to some degree, they're not necessarily slot target guys. They're outside, big play, da da da. You want these guys that are just hyper targeted, which is what we kind of thought Ladd would be a little bit. And he hasn't been awful in terms of targets, but we'll get there. But I just think that's what Garrett Wilson is sure to do, where I think Marvin Harrison is a little bit quarterback dependent and right now doesn't have the right quarterback, as everybody knows, but also he can't overcome it. I know no player can truly overcome their quarterback at the wide receiver position, but certainly these slot mavens, they'll perform in almost any situation, no matter what happens to the team. You're going to be targeting JSN, Amon-Ra, Puka, players like that just relentlessly.
Garrett Wilson.
And
Yeah.
Garrett Wilson's one of them.
Yeah, I think just the way he produces is just so much more versatile. The way his downfield targets are is that he's wide open because he just killed a defensive back and he's catching an easy touchdown. And Marvin Harrison's deep targets are contested almost every time. And I'm a Marvin Harrison advocate, I would say.
I like him too.
I like him a lot. I think he's also pigeonholed into bad usage with that team as just an X wide receiver and not running too much in the slot, too much motion and all of that stuff as well. So I think they need to do some work there. I think that offensive coordinator, Drew Petzing, just needs to go and they need to figure out an innovative, they had a guy named Cliff Kingsbury that was there a little while back and kicked him to the curb after a couple bad seasons. But yeah, it's looking rocky for Marv, and it's looking like Garrett Wilson is yet again about to succeed with a below average quarterback in Justin Fields, much like he's done his entire career. So yeah, Garrett Wilson, I think, is an elite talent that gets pushed down a little bit just because of his surroundings.
Totally agree. All right, I got a fun one. You're gonna like this one. You're gonna like this one. I got a buddy. Everybody knows JB Cho.
JB Cho knows.
JB Cho knows. He's a great analyst. He's a great dude. Bears fan, still a great guy somehow. And so the backstory is last year in a league that we're in, I foisted Amari Cooper upon him. Amari Cooper's tough to sell. I found a way to convince JB Cho that he needed Amari Cooper. And so his question is, it's a great question. How do you deal with deep anger after trading for Amari Cooper last season and what you thought was a pretty good deal, and then he stopped playing and you were bummed, and then you were filled with hope when he signed with the Raiders and then he retired soon after? Yeah. So how do you deal with the deep anger and rage from something like that? I'm sorry, JB Cho. I wouldn't know. I'm sorry. I wouldn't know. You're gonna have to tell me, pal. I think
I've done it too, JB. I've done it too.
We've all done it.
You got to eat that crow. You just got to eat that crow and get better. Laughing about it in the group chat, if the boys are chirping at you, is good. Just get on their side and be like, yeah, I was a fucking idiot. That's how I like to approach it as a self-deprecating Canadian. You know what I mean? Just joining in the laughs on yourself and it makes it feel a little bit better. But there's not much that can actually really make it feel better until that guy is a distant memory on your roster.
Yeah, well, he is now. I can tell you though,
so.
JB, in the league that I'm talking about, this the one where I lost neighbors and the Dynasty Game Theory Invitation where I won 2 years ago and lost last year. In that league, I could pull up the trade, and I don't even want to because it's fucking upsetting. But I traded for Joe Mixon. And if you happen to remember, Joe Mixon didn't win anybody jack shit in the playoffs. He was not good in the playoffs. So I made this trade for this playoff player. I think I lost David Montgomery. So I gave up David Montgomery plus stuff for Mixon. It did not work out because now I had the same type of thing where Mixon didn't help me win anything, and I'm eating him on the roster now. I
Mhm.
can't trade him. He's basically a sunk cost. And everything that I traded for him was just poof, vanished, given. It was like a donation.
Mhm.
And JB Cho donated whatever he gave me for Amari as I did for Joe Mixon. These things happen. The lesson, I think the lesson is in general, don't push like that for the money. It's so
Yeah.
hard because when the money's on the table, I'm gonna advocate. You can clip this, Trav, and I'm gonna say, push for the money. You got to do what you got to do,
Yeah.
because that's true too. But I think you just have to have some level of discipline in those moments. And here's the thing: if I would have looked around, and David Montgomery's hurt and doesn't do shit, and Joe Mixon goes for fucking 30 and 30 in the semis and finals, and I could have made a trade for him and I didn't, I'd be kicking myself nonetheless, just the same.
Mhm.
And I'd have paid all that shit. Whatever I got rid of to get Mixon, I'd be happy if I had won the damn league. So it's really a results based historical, retroactive that you do where you're like, because I lost and because this guy now sucks, I hate the trade. But if that had worked out, it was a gamble you knew you were taking,
Mhm.
you'd be thrilled. So I'm talking out of both
I
sides of
think
my mouth.
I think some of it can be a little bit of feel, right? Like
Yeah.
if you feel a little bit gross about it, which I'm sure JV felt a little bit gross about acquiring Amari Cooper last season, then you probably shouldn't do it. If you feel stoked about it, then it's probably okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, I've done that too. I think like years ago, I had no quarterback in a 2 quarterback league. It wasn't even super flex. You had to start a second quarterback or it was a
Yeah.
zero. And I overpaid big time. I think it was Flacco that I overpaid for. Um, and he wasn't playing good or something like that. And it was an absolute stinker and it just bit me in
Yeah.
the ass. And I traded like a couple of decent assets to get him in a 2 QB league where the value of quarterbacks is way, way up. And yeah, that was a rough one. And I just had to eat it
Yeah.
and learn that lesson, you know?
Yeah. It's true. The good managers are going to make you overpay too. They're going to squeeze your ass, right? As
Hmm.
I got squeezed on Joe Mixon, I didn't get any free I had to pay an extra tax to get Joe Mixon because it's clear and evident what I'm doing. It's
Hmm.
clear and evident that I'm trying to win the fucking league. It's clear and evident that I'm trading him an injured player that he doesn't care. He's like, as a matter of fact, I would prefer David Montgomery next year to Joe Mixon potentially. Obviously, now you sure would, but he doesn't care in that moment. So he's like, you need to pay me. You need to pay me some taxes so that
Hmm.
I can give you this guy you really, really want. Huh? And I probably did the same a little bit to JB Cho, even though in a lot of ways, I think, I was probably a little softer on Amari, but I did want to get I've probably a second or something. I don't even know what I did. I might have hurt him real bad. We'll have to go check the trade. If I didn't mean it. If I hurt you really bad, I owe you one. But I don't think I did. But you're my job is to squeeze you for whatever
Hmm.
you're
Absolutely. It is.
willing because you're trying to win your league. I mean, hey, it's a small price to pay, right? Give me your second. Give me the extra thingy, and you're going to be just fine. And you know that's the other thing is you get squeezed. You get your ass squeezed in those deals, and that's the double pain.
I think if it's like I think that's why I said in those situations where you have a neighbors and you need to fill a spot, maybe put your second on the table with another player is that it's easier to stomach getting rid of those seconds, right? Even the thirds too. And so if a second or a third can get a deal done for you, I think trust in your own ability to reacquire a second or a third down the line. And if that gets that deal done that you feel like you need, I think you can feel okay with it because you're not giving away your first. We talk about it all the time. Those seconds are always flying around. There's seconds
Yeah,
always flying around. You can always acquire one. You can pretty much always sell one, right? And so I think just trust in your ability to reacquire at a later date. Um, if you're throwing in those draft picks that you're like, I feel like that's a bit of an overpay. You have to overpay a little bit in those situations. And so,
sometimes.
you know,
Well, as Matt Chester says, the church of seconds. You
mhm,
there's a certain price point of second round picks that are very interesting because when you're buying them, like especially now they're cheap. If you can play it right and not try and sell them until they're on the clock, they go up in value big time.
oh yeah.
So a second round pick, when it's on the clock, can sometimes even fetch you a future first, especially if it's an early top 3 or 4 or 5 pick. You can sometimes just be like the 202 for any future first, and they'll pay it. Try
There you
and do
go.
that with just a random second you have on your roster right now. You'll get laughed out the building. So that just shows you that, and obviously so, but it
Mhm.
shows you the difference of where those picks can spike to in terms of value. They can actually go all the way up to a perceived first round value when on the clock in your rookie draft if they're high enough and there's a player that slips. And sometimes, you know what? Maybe rightfully so. Guess who was in the early second round a lot of times? Mr. Jackson Dart. Had you
Mhm.
paid, maybe even Mecca Buka, if you paid a future first for one of those two guys, you'd have been doing it right. A lot of times you'd be doing it wrong. I did sell the 112 for a future first, and it was Caleb Johnson in a league.
Ooh, yeah,
Yeah. And so I got the likely 101 in
that's
2026 for
incredible,
Caleb Johnson, right?
incredible.
So the point of the matter is that sometimes you can be buying it or selling it and doing it right or wrong either way, and you never actually know. So got to be a little bit careful. But the point of the matter is those seconds are funny values that are interesting. So
Mhm.
pay attention, buy up your
Find the
seconds,
find the
hold them,
pockets, find the pockets.
and hold them until it's draft time because
Mhm.
then you can sell them big time. Well, buddy, we did a podcast.
We did a podcast, brother. It's great to be back on flexing a little bit of the dynasty game theory muscle. Like you mentioned, I dig into player takes a lot.
Yeah.
I've been writing some pieces over on the True North Fantasy Substack and things where it is very player take heavy. And so it's always nice. You boys kind of bring me back into this stuff, which is kind of like the backbone of what we do when we play Dynasty. And so I love that you guys make me contextualize this stuff. The undrafted, I mean, I edit your podcast every week. Shout out to Smitty, who's going to be giving it a whirl and joining the team as well as Michael P. Duncan. And yeah, just shout out to the undrafted fans. You guys are a big part of the core of the Undroppables fan base. I've learned since I've joined the Undroppables. Jack's a testament to you, testament to all the great guests that you have on, Michael P. Duncan. Yeah, so thanks everybody for supporting the Undroppables, because as like, a fellow person who bleeds Undroppables like you, Jax, that's really important to me. And so are the undrafted listeners. So thanks for having me on, dude. It's interesting being a guest. I don't do it very often.
That's awesome, man. Thank you. That's a lot of kind words, and I seldom wax poetic about myself, and I probably don't even thank the guests. I mean the listeners often enough. Sometimes I forget that they're there because they're not in this room right here, and sometimes I can't escape the fact that I'm talking to so many people. So I'll have both thoughts at various times when I'm doing this, and I keep sometimes forgetting that there are people who are getting to know me through this medium, and that they feel like they know me. And the cool thing, I feel like, for me personally, I have always been an open door. I did shut off my DM thing on Twitter because you just get like porn bots.
Dude, it's
Like,
the worst.
like
Same with
I
me.
wanted them open because I like it when people hit me
Hmm.
up. Look, I can just ignore you if I don't want to, but the porn bots are just there's like 10,000. I'm like, dude, I don't
A day.
fucking want to. Yeah, I don't want to do this. Like,
Yeah,
why do I have to
it's
do
annoying.
this?
Yeah.
It's so annoying, right? So like, and I don't want to. I don't know how else you do it because I do want someone who maybe a listener that I don't know, that I don't follow, that isn't a check mark. I don't give a fuck if they have a check mark. I just want them to
Mhm.
not be a bot.
Yeah.
So anyway, I do love you. Hit me up on regular Twitter. Just sort of comment on something I do, and if you want to chat with me, say, hey man, can I DM you or something? The only reason I haven't closed are those bots. I swear. I used to love getting random fucking hit up all the time. So excuse me. Thank you so much to the listeners. Yeah, man, I absolutely love it. I love what you guys bring. Thing I'll say about the listeners too is, especially like we have a number of leagues where the undrafted has 2 leagues and the underground has a league. There's a lot of sharp dudes in there, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
dude, they are sharks too. Like I always talk to you guys about how I need to devote more time to my dynasty leagues and things like that. These guys are fucking dialed in the underground league, man.
They
I'm getting
really are,
trades all
man.
the time. The chat is amazing, kind of to your point of getting to know you. Like it just feels like a bunch of buddies that have been around for a while. I
Yeah.
actually went personally golfing with one of the guys from the underground league because he came out vacationing near where I live here. So
Yes.
yeah, the community is super cool that you have built around your show, and that the Undroppables have built around themselves. And so, yeah, I love being a part part of the crew. We're pushing this bad boy forward, so stay tuned for more big things to come for the
Yes, sir.
Undrafted and the Undroppables peeps.
Yes, sir. And on that note, on behalf of everybody here at the Undroppables, on behalf of everybody here at the Undrafted, on behalf of the greatest podcast producer who ever walked the earth, fellow Philadelphia Eagle fan, Michael P. Duncan, you have been joined by the Trav Trapper, Travis Seel. I am Jax Falcone, and we are out.